Exactly 153,000 years ago, we began our work on this planet. Everything here was still very rudimentary and primitive. Its inhabitants were still in the cave age, fighting against beasts and trying at all costs to survive in this inhospitable and hostile environment. Humans were no longer in crude caves. They had already developed survival items such as axes, knives, spears, and sickles, and they already inhabited places with some structure, with support tables for processing hunt, and they made fires to cook food and keep warm. Humans already understood that hunt rotted and needed to be cooked. They ate fruits, leaving vegetables and legumes for the animals. Everything was very rudimentary. When we arrived here, our first mission was to organize the tribes into types by level of development, because there were indeed differences between humans. Some had already discovered more techniques for making weapons than others, in addition to having a slightly higher moral standard in the constitution of tribes and protection of the species. They were less individualistic. During this time we stayed further away and did not interfere in the lives of the inhabitants, only observing their evolution and progress. The birth of larger tribes, what could be called a settlement, occurred around 130,000 years ago, when their species finally understood that a united group was stronger for protecting hunt against predators and against other tribes that came to steal food. There was already conflict between tribes located closer together at that time. Life followed its evolutionary course, and humans gradually developed planting techniques, such as bringing seedlings of plants they liked to eat closer to the settlement, concentrating the species of animals they liked to eat in small enclosures to later kill them, having notions of food rationing in cold times, food storage and shelf life, and even notions of making clothes from animal skins and vines. So, 120,000 years ago, we realized it was time to bring a more evolved life here to accelerate the process of its development. You needed to gain knowledge of civil construction, families, cities, agricultural structures, and sanitation. We brought here the exiled inhabitants of Capella. At that time, they arrived here as evolved souls, with the mission of teaching the local inhabitants more evolved concepts of life and society. They were born among you, in your primitive bodies, to accelerate the evolutionary march of Earth. For them, it was a great punishment, but for Earth, they arrived as gods, bringing superior knowledge. Instinctively, they began to dominate the other inhabitants and started to lead all processes, whether it was the domination of tribes, the organization of peoples, hunting, fishing, and planting strategies. Then they began building stone houses, evolved to building houses in already sedimented rocks, and began to structure the houses with more comfort, with furs and utensils for preparing food, jars for carrying water, and even some types of toys. Your society evolved into villages, and the notion of groupings and families was established. The Earth entered a period of transition from a rudimentary to a primitive world, and you remained in this state until cities actually began to emerge. 85,000 years ago, your cities were born. From the larger grouping of stone houses came the need to bring structure, with communal fires, lakes for collecting water, settlements for visitors, mills for pounding grain, and even beds for the sick, separate from healthy people. Religious leaders already existed and played the role of soothsayers of the future, predicting rain, cold, heat, blizzards, and all sorts of meteorological factors that could harm food collection. At that time, the sick were treated with more food. There was no medical knowledge. Around the year 80,000, Atlantis was born. It was a beautiful city of overlapping white stones forming large buildings, somewhat closer to the Mayan cities, you know. Atlantis was surrounded by water channels that came from afar, bringing water to the houses and carrying away the dirt. Naturally, the channels drained sewage and dust away from the inhabitants through the flow of winds and currents. Its people were tall and slender, measuring about 2 meters, with Caucasian skin and almond-shaped hair. Like the original peoples of North America, they were the remnants of Atlantis. Atlantis had 50,000 inhabitants, and its rulers counted births and deaths to regulate food production, hunting, and fishing. The city had supply markets, and people organized themselves into work groups according to their skills and family tradition. There was the hunters group, the fishermen's group, the farmers group, the construction workers group, the group to support the sick, the tool makers group, and the clothing makers group. Everything was very divided and organized. The leaders had a more mythological than executive character. They were there to align themselves with the supreme god and receive visions of prosperity or hardship for the year. They already used an astronomical calendar in Atlantis, very similar to the Mayan calendar you know. The people were happy and united. There was peace, joy, and progress. They knew no evil and no one was ever harmed. There were no prisons or laws against disorder, as everything was carried out respecting individual faculties and abilities. Their currency was barter. What one group produced was exchanged for what another produced, so everyone had everything. Each family, formed by the union of a man and a woman before the leaders, gained the right to a home and received from the city all the necessary infrastructure to begin their lives. When children were born, they were cared for by their mothers and elders, and from the age of 7 they learned professions, already helping their parents and uncles in family activities. It was a balanced city, a healthy society. Until evil struck and great turmoil befell the city. A 13-year-old boy stabbed a fellow during an argument. Before this event, conflicts between children or adults were handled by leaders, who accompanied the citizens in dispute, providing joint activities until peace was established. The boy who caused the other's death came from a lineage of hunters. They were taught from an early age to respect animals and only sacrifice what was necessary to feed the people. But this boy, out of pure curiosity, decided to stab a fellow. There, the first crime was born. On that occasion, the elders and leaders came together, understanding that there had been curiosity and that it was necessary to increase the teaching with the hunting group about the law of life and balance. They also sought to support the family that lost their son with assistance and care. However, little by little, other crimes against the balance began to occur in the other activity groups. One teenager wanted to have more food than another, to have better clothes regardless of the activity they performed, and the number of fights and arguments among young people began to grow. There was the beginning of housing disputes for new couples, fights between neighbors over water and garbage not treated as they should be according to the rules, and so, little by little, the balance ceased to exist. The beautiful and peaceful city turned into chaos. The leaders asked the heavens for guidance and learned that less developed spirits were among them to grow and evolve. At that time, they needed to revise the city's laws and rules against acts of imbalance in order to contain the growing cases. They needed to create houses of guidance for citizens in imbalance and control of actions, guard. There, each misguided citizen was accompanied by the guard for the necessary time, until they could be reintegrated into social activities. However, the number of repeat offenders increased, and the elders and leaders understood that only the expulsion of the citizen would bring peace and learning, until he asked for forgiveness and was reintegrated. Each expelled citizen would need to survive by his own means, without support from the city. It could not re-enter the city or trade with its inhabitants. Any and all contact was forbidden to any citizen, under penalty of expulsion. Then there was a union of the exiles in disorderly bands to cause true chaos in revenge for having been expelled. At that time, the law of execution was born to re-establish order. Then the leaders understood that only sacrifice would bring balance again and a definitive resolution of order. Then Atlantis succumbed. As crimes continued to increase, the imbalance reached its peak. Every family had cases of people expelled or sacrificed, and a constant feeling of injustice took over. Many left the city and founded new settlements, fighting to bring back the peaceful life they once had. Thus Lemuria emerged in the year 58,000. Atlantis had over 1 million inhabitants and many surrounding cities at that time. Lemuria grew as a settlement, then a city. Its location was where Greenland is today. Lemuria, too, gradually began to face the same problems of disorder, as these were inherent to the less evolved spirits born among them. And Atlantis succumbed. Little by little, the inhabitants of good character left, the rules were corrupted, the phase of favoritism of some against others began, those who were better connected or positioned in the hierarchies of power had more privileges than others, which caused revolt and indignation. New cases of usurpation of goods and rights began to emerge, unjust murders and executions, heinous crimes of rape and complete looting of houses. Thus, the beautiful white city became a true chaos. The population began to feel oppressed and forced to pay for its protection and the continuation of activities. The same thing happened in Lemuria. Chaos reigned. The good people were forced to leave, migrating to the peninsulas of North America, present-day USA, Canada, and Mexico. Gradually, they migrated to settlements in Central and South America. In the year 35,000, Atlantis and Lemuria sank. The continent succumbed. The golden civilization was over. Thousands of people died in the Great Tsunami. The water took everything. The continent gradually sank. The part that remained above the water level was covered by ice. We never interfered in the daily lives of the inhabitants. We only had the role of monitoring progress and bringing evolved spirits little by little to accelerate the march of progress. However, there was indeed the exile of Capella in new waves, and these inhabitants were brought to Atlantis and Lemuria in order to help in the progress and learn from the more primitive life when compared to Capella.